From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Thanks to a late campaign surge, Democrat Helena Foulkes came within 3 points of defeating Dan McKee in the 2022 primary for governor, and she's already raising big money for a potential rematch in 2026. What lessons did the former CVS CEO take away from entering the sharp-elbowed world of Rhode Island politics? Our guest this week on Newsmakers, Helena Foulkes. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White, alongside 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi. Helena Foulkes, welcome back to Newsmakers. It's good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Are you running for governor in 2026?
Get right to it. Listen, I learned a lot in the last race, and I've really been working on how I can learn more, be better, help Rhode Island. And certainly there's no race going on, so I'm not running for anything at the moment. But I do want to be in a position where I'm prepared, so I'm raising resources and laying the groundwork.
Would you say you're 50-50, 75-25, and where's the needle right now?
Hard to know. I'm very committed to Rhode Island. I'm very committed to making a difference. I'm really spending time listening, but I'm leaning into it so that I have a chance to serve. When
do you think you'll have to decide? What's your deadline for saying yes or no to throwing your hat into the ring?
Yeah. Last time I announced in the fall before the year, so that would be next fall, and I would say that would be the latest, as many people have told me. I didn't have enough time. So part of what I'm using this time for is to understand what are all the issues that really matter to Rhode Islanders, and where can I make a difference?
So, and we do want to talk issues in a minute, but we're going to do some more politics first.
Yeah.
I've interviewed a lot of people who've run for office, successfully, unsuccessfully, both. And I've heard often you learn more by losing a race than you do from the races you win. You take away from that. What were the biggest lessons you learned from running your first? I mean, we should remind viewers, you have politics runs in your family. Your grandfather was a U.S. Senator. Your uncle was a U.S. Senator. Your mother was very close to Nancy Pelosi. But you'd never run.
Right.
And so you had to learn lessons yourself. What were the biggest lessons you learned from that and coming up just a little short?
Yeah. Well, first I would say the biggest lessons I've ever learned in my life are the moments where I didn't get what I wanted or I went through a hard time. And I often say that to young people as I'm mentoring them. It's easy to feel great about the glory moments, but the hard times are when you really grow. For me, I learned at least two things. The first is trust your gut and lean into your strengths, because I think when you get into something like this, people are reminding you of all your weaknesses. And so you really have to remember, well, what got me here is what I'm good at. So how do I remember that? And the other thing is just surrounding yourself with a great team. I only got to deliver great results in my business career by having great teams. I had a great team, but it's also an opportunity to think about, how do you keep surrounding yourself? Not just, when I say team, I don't mean just the political team. I mean the team of volunteers, the people who threw themselves into me, and I'm so grateful for them. There are a lot of them, people I didn't even know before the race, who threw their hearts and souls. They were there on that election night, crying just as hard as I was. So really thinking about, how do I tap into their energy and their strength?
One other thing that I heard occasionally from political watchers at the time was they said they felt that your campaign was a little tied up with too many consultants, too many cooks in the kitchen initially. Do you share that when you look back?
Yeah, I think that when you've never done it before, you're looking for the best advice you can get, and I had some great advice, but at the end of the day, the last 30 days, the people who are with you are on the ground. And I always say,
it was pretty lean by the end. I remember going to campaign events with your team.
Well, we were always lean, but I think the thing is you realize in any situation, tough situation in life, you realize who you want to be in a foxhole with. And being in a campaign is like being in a foxhole. I had amazing people in the foxhole. I just need to get more of them this time.
Was there a single biggest mistake that you identified, or something you look back at and said, I should have done that one differently?
No, not really. I don't think there's a single moment. There's a lot of people have given me advice about, getting in the race sooner, getting up on TV sooner. But at the end of the day, 30 days out, I was polling at 14%, and there were a lot of people thought I had no chance. And there I got right up to 30% at the last minute. So there are a lot of things that fall into place when something like that happens.
Well, one of those things, you had the debate with Channel 12, and that seemed to be a big night for you. Do you wish you had called for debates a little bit earlier?
Yeah, I would love to. First of all, I think not just for me, I think that the people of Rhode Island in any election deserve to hear more from candidates as early and soon as possible. There were a lot of forums that were very programmed, where you didn't really get a sense for the people. But I think in the debates that you guys had and others, the Channel 10 one as well, you really got to see us all, because we just had to be real. We didn't know what the questions were, and I think that's very helpful for the voters.
And we prefer to throw you all off balance in those debates. Anyway, well, let's turn to some issue questions. I want to start with the bridge, the Washington Bridge. Obviously, this has been the biggest issue in state politics in recent months. You've been watching it. What would you, if you would have, as Tim pointed out to me this morning, we were meeting, you'd have had this problem potentially when you came in, because that bridge predates the current governor and many other governors. What would you have done when they came to you, if you were governor, and said, the bridge needs to close immediately because we found a problem?
Yeah. Look, I don't know everything that went on, and I don't want to use my time today to Monday morning quarterback, because I'm not the governor. I would say the biggest opportunity and lesson I've learned in my career is communicate, communicate, communicate. I talk to single moms who have to get their kids to school and then to work, owners on both sides of the bridge, people whose lives have been upended. I have friends who work in the hospitals who say people are leaving those jobs because the commute has really gotten to them. And so for me, my heart goes out to them, and I think leadership is about listening to those stories and being as available as possible, and being a person who's just absorbing all of that content, the real stories of their lives, and then being able to communicate what's going on.
You know, I know you don't want a Monday morning quarterback, but we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you this question, because it's on a lot of people's mind. Would RIDOT Director Peter Alviti still be leading the agency if you were governor?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on any personnel questions. I think the most important job of any state leader is to have the right team around him or her. So if I do run again and I'm in that position, I'll be looking at every one of these jobs and make sure we have the right people.
I want to talk about the campus protests that have sprung up nationwide. You were, we should point out, president of Harvard University's Board of Overseers, which was one of two governing boards at Harvard. Look, you've seen what's going on at Columbia, what happened at Columbia and other schools. What do you make of it, and are college leaders handling it the right way?
I think it's a really difficult situation. The October 7th attack was horrifying, and there is a lot of pain among Jewish students and a feeling of rising anti-Semitism that is very concerning. And at the same time, you know, watching 30,000 or more Gazans lose their lives is very upsetting. So it's a really tense moment. Very hard time to be one of these leaders. I do look at our own state, Chris Paxson, and the job she did at Brown, and I think it's an excellent job, and I've trying to understand what made that so effective. I'm always a student of leadership. I think Chris, as I've understood it, was very available well before this. She's walking around campus, she has relationships, so people trust her. So I think when the moment came, she created a dialogue where the students felt that they could be heard. So it didn't have to devolve into something that was so oriented towards the police. And the fact that she was able to do that, I think, is a lesson for a lot of people.
Do you think, you know, one of your jobs when you were at CVS was branding, marketing, things like that for the pharmacy group. Putting on your brand person hat with this, it seems to me that even these are some of the most famous institutions in America, Harvard, Columbia, et cetera, but they're taking real damage to their reputation in the eyes of the public from how this has gone. Do you think so?
I do think so, and I think that many of them were overprogrammed by lawyers as they prepped, and I think they forgot their hearts. You know, this is, again, just remembering the pain, and these are, you know, these are people who know it. I think in the moment, when you're under stress, you can forget just to be a human being. And I think that ties back to all forms of leadership, remembering there's numbers, there's responsibilities, but at the end of the day, it's the people you're serving.
We have a little less than a minute left here, but before we go to break, I want to ask you about the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, or LEOBOR. That's a state law that governs how police misconduct is investigated and disciplined. And it's been a topic of debate up at the State House and the General Assembly for a few years now. There are calls to reform it, calls to repeal it, or keep it as is. Yeah. What do you think?
I think we should really be looking to reform it at the very least, and make sure that we are, look, 99% of police officers are amazing people doing really hard jobs. Just want to make sure that the mayors and people who are running each of our cities and towns has the ability to hold anyone who's doing the wrong thing in a position where they can't be out in the force.
All right, we're going to take a break on the program. Our guest this week, obviously, Helena Foulkes. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Helena Foulkes. I was going through your Twitter or X, whatever we want to call it, I don't know, going through your feed. You know, a lot of people haven't heard from you or seen you since the election. Going through your feed, it was interesting. You've been busy. So how would you kind of describe what you've been up to for the past, since the election?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I really decided, as I said at the beginning, I have an opportunity to learn more, figure out what the people of Rhode Island are missing. And so I spent the beginning few months just going around to people and saying, I'd love to help you. How could I help you? How can I learn from you? And one of those was Mayor Rivera up in Central Falls. As you know, education's a huge passion for me. I wanted to figure out if I could make a difference. And I said to her, I don't know if I can help you, but I would love to. So that has turned into a relationship where I have no formal role, but I'm really helping her put a team together, which is looking at the fact that Central Falls has been under state control for 30 years. And
the school specifically,
the school system. Sorry, yeah. And not so long ago, the RICAS scores were 6% of kids passed their grade level reading and 4% math. And the mayor has great passion. She's smart. She's a doer. And so we have put a team together that's doing really great work. This team has interviewed over 150 teachers in the school system to find out what they're looking for. Now they're talking to community members, and all of this will lead to recommendations that the mayor and her team put in front of others. I also developed a relationship with Joe Policina Jr. in Johnston, very different town, but one where I know that there's a lot of, there's just a lot of financial strain and stress, and again, in education. What I was intrigued by is they had done a big bond, a school bond, a couple years before, and I started talking to him about what could schools look like in the next 5 to 10 years. So in the course of those conversations, he said, why don't you come join the school construction committee? And so I've been part of that, and I really get to see how all these decisions get made. We're breaking ground on a new elementary school tomorrow, building a new high school. So all those things have been really interesting. I joined the board of Crossroads because obviously housing in this state, whether it's homelessness or just affordable housing, is a really big issue. So I wanted to learn more about that and be surrounded by people who know more than I do.
I also noticed you've popped up repeatedly at these public hearings for RIPTA, where they've been debating, and this predates the drama around Scott Avedian's departure, around service cuts and the bond, the budget future of RIPTA. And I found it interesting because you actually have been, even before you said you don't want a Monday morning quarterback, you've clearly been a little cautious about where to weigh in on policy. Yeah. But this is one you've been public about wanting to be a part of the conversation. Why RIPTA? As you looked around at all the issues you could try to weigh in on or make your voice heard or whatever, why did RIPTA appeal to you as something to talk about?
I guess a couple things. Number one, I knew there was a lot I didn't know, so I wanted to learn. And number two, it felt like a place where people most in need in this state require the services of RIPTA, and so I wanted to understand it. I actually attended those sessions and really just sat in the back. So I was given an opportunity at each session by the RIPTA officials who were there to come up and speak in front of the group, and I declined. I wasn't there as a politician or a future politician. I learn a lot when I'm able to sit in the back and listen. And I remember this one woman who stood up in February, a very cold February day down at URI's campus, and all these people had taken buses to get to URI's campus. She came from Pawtucket. And she talked about a bus route that they were considering cutting. And she said, in a really emotional tone, she said, if you cut this bus route, I will lose my job and I therefore may lose my apartment. And that really struck me because this is something that I think a lot of the folks who are being served by RIPTA don't have a strong political voice. And so I just wanted to be in a position where I could learn from it.
Have you ridden a RIPTA bus?
I've ridden a RIPTA bus a long time ago, but not lately. And it's it's something, when I think about the future of this state, it's one where I could imagine a world where we should be tripling the spend on RIPTA, get more people moving faster, cars off roads, and it's also great for the climate. So I think this is a small enough state. There's a statistic that says something like 77% of Rhode Islanders live within a 10-minute walk to the bus. It doesn't mean the buses are moving all the time, but that's kind of exciting and interesting for me in terms of what that could look like.
As you pointed out, education was a pillar of your campaign in 2024, and I recall that you had pledged that if test scores do not improve in your first term, you would not run for a second. If you run for governor in 2026, you're going to make the same pledge?
It's interesting. As I've been doing I've been doing a series of gatherings, sometimes in people's homes or other forums, and one of the things I've been struck by is the number of people who played that back to me, who've said they were really, and they couldn't even remember all of the details of it. They just were struck by the fact that no politician ever says, if I don't do something, I won't run again. And that's what resonated for them. So for sure, I am very committed that I haven't led my life to be in politics. I'm here to serve and make an impact if I do decide to do it. And so I want to really think about what are all the forms of accountability that I should be delivering, and work on those and deliver those and stand by them.
I know talking to voters, especially in those late days of the primary where there were a lot of shifts happening in the electorate, one thing that appealed to voters as they looked was your business background. There are quite a few voters there's always this feeling among voters that if you worked in business, maybe you can do more for the state economy. And that makes me think about Governor McKee set this goal in his State of the State, saying he wanted to try to increase Rhode Islanders' average income $20,000 by 2030. Belatedly, we've learned that's not adjusted for inflation, so the goal is kind of just on track with the current forecast. But I had someone run the numbers for me, Andy Boardman. He says it would take $50,000 in income and growth for Rhode Islanders to meet Massachusetts by 2030. Even if that's impossible, if you were the governor, what are the levers? What do you see out there that could really make a measurable impact on closing the gap between Rhode Island and Massachusetts?
Yeah, and it's a really, growing this economy is a great goal. And I don't know quite the right metric of success. That's what the governor chose. But for me, it's, I'm talking to a whole bunch of people. The biggest worry that I often hear from people is that their children and grandchildren won't be able to find a good job and stay here. And so we've got to have an economic engine. For me, I look for where do we already have strength? How do we lean into the strengths we have? And I look at our ocean and coastline and think about leaning into water and all the resources. And there are already a great number of startups there. I also look at Quonset and all that's going on and how we can do more. But I also think as you think about building an economy, you've got to create a sense that the business community can have confidence that state leaders will be doing the right thing and live by their word and not surprise them because they're making long-term investments. So I think there's more we can do to create a really good business climate. But connected to that is making sure that people have the skills and resources to do the jobs that are needed, whether that's in the K through 12 system or it's around adult learning. There's so much we could be doing around adult learning. And connected to it, when I talk to manufacturers, they'll raise the issue of childcare, that their workers can't show up if they're worried about having children at home without caregiving. So it's not one simple answer, but I think driving this economy is an overarching objective for anyone who cares about the state.
And one of the big ones, of course, is housing.
Yeah.
As you point out, you're on the board of Crossroads Housing and Homelessness, hand in hand. It's been a big part of what we're doing here at Channel 12, focusing on the housing crisis in the state, as is the focus of Speaker Shekarchi. Is there anything that policymakers aren't doing to move the needle on this topic that you would do, or that you think that Rhode Island should be doing? And we have about 2 minutes left.
I think that there has been a lot of really good work, well-intentioned work, but we are not seeing the results. And we need 20,000 more units in this state to start to bend the curve. I think you just were posting something on Austin, Texas. The way you solve a problem like this is you create lots more supply. And we have a lot of areas in our state that are already built up and can be converted or changed over. We've got to, I think the biggest thing any leader can do is create a scorecard of accountability so people know how are we doing. part of the issue here is zoning laws and unlocking things that are very local. But it's very hard to get a sense as the average Rhode Islander of where are those big unlocks, where's the opportunity, and there's not enough movement. And meantime, people are being squeezed out of their homes and their apartments. I'll tell you a basic one that seems so obvious to me is the assisted dwelling units. And you're right, Speaker Shekarchi has the ADUs. And you know, I've been in California and Massachusetts where those exist, and they are home runs for the homeowners and the people who want to have more affordable housing.
So to you, that's a no-brainer.
I think that's a no-brainer. Yeah. So we've got to do more to create more supply, and anything we could do. It won't be one action, but we've been very focused on legislative efforts and bonds, which is great, but not the back end of it, which is what do we get for all this?
All right, Helena Foulkes, we are out of time, but we appreciate you coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Stick around. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. The governor's race wasn't the only campaign finance news this week. This was the first quarter when Rhode Island politicians could accept annual donations of $2,000, double the previous limit. Among those who made use of the new rule, House Speaker Joe Shekarchi, who has the biggest campaign war chest in the state. Filings show the speaker received 18 $2,000 donations, helping swell his campaign account to nearly $2.5 million. Common Cause Rhode Island Executive Director John Marion says time will tell how the new higher contribution amounts will affect politics.
Generally speaking, whenever some change is made to campaign finance, it takes a little while for the campaigns to adjust. And, you know, I think we will see over the course of this year campaigns adjusting. It's also going to be interesting to see, from my perspective, who's trying to influence the process, right? So are the really sort of high-powered lobbyists going to be expected to give the maximum?
And we have a full write-up on the latest campaign finance numbers for the top politicians in Rhode Island right now on WPRI.com. Our guest this week on Newsmakers was Helena Foulkes. If you missed any of it, you can also see that on WPRI.com, or you can subscribe to our podcast by scanning that QR code on the lower part of your screen right there. I want to thank you for watching Newsmakers. And for Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week.